The scream still echoed in her ears, fading slowly into a silence so absolute it pressed against her skull. For a moment, Evelyn could feel nothing but the memory of the fog, thick and suffocating, swallowing everything she had reached for. The hands, those pale, skeletal hands clawing upward from the lake, her own voice screaming into the void, and then darkness. Her eyes snapped open. She was back in the motel room, the dim, flickering light of the bedside lamp casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. The sheets were damp with sweat, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. The nightmare of the lake clung to her mind, insistent, whispering that it was not over. She pressed her hands to her face, wishing the images would dissolve, but they lingered stubbornly. The fog, the hands, the water. It all felt too real to be just a dream. Outside the window, the world was muted and strange. The fog had not lifted. It clung to the town like a living thing, curling between the streetlights and rooftops, wrapping Hollow Creek in a cold, heavy silence. Every shadow seemed to move, every shape in the mist threatening to reach out and drag her back into the lake's grasp. She pulled the thin curtain aside and stared, her fingers trembling. The fog was denser than it had been the night before, and it felt aware, watching, waiting. Evelyn sank into the edge of the bed, knees drawn up, mind racing. She thought of the hands again, reaching, grasping. A wave of dread rolled through her. How had it felt so alive, so deliberate? She swallowed hard. No rational explanation could justify the image of those waterlogged fingers stretching toward her. And yet, the lake had always been silent, tranquil, ordinary, until last night, until the fog had swallowed everything. Her journalist instincts stirred despite the fear. Fear could not guide her. She had to know. She had to understand what had happened. The town, the lake, the fog. There was a story buried beneath it all, and she had a responsibility to uncover it, even if it cost her peace of mind, even if it tested the limits of her courage. This was not just a report. It was a truth, calling her name. Her notebook lay on the small table beside the bed, pages still filled with frantic scrawls from the previous night. Evelyn picked it up, flipping through the jumbled sentences. Fog thicker than normal. Voices. Hands reaching from the lake. She traced her fingers over the words, as if touching them might solidify reality. Everything she had written felt real, undeniable. She was not imagining it. She could not be. A sudden creak of floorboards made her stiffen. She froze, listening. The motel was old. Every step, every gust of wind, every shifting piece of furniture carried a groan. But this felt different. A presence. Something outside the room, somewhere beyond the thin walls. She held her breath, straining her ears, but there was nothing. Silence. Only the fog pressing against the glass, unnervingly still. Evelyn's mind raced. Could it have followed her? Could the lake, the fog, still reach her here, miles above the water? She shook the thought away. Number. She would not let it control her. She would not let fear dictate her actions. The story, whatever it was, demanded she move forward. Her gaze drifted again to the window. The fog shifted, curling unnaturally as if it breathed. She felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes, invisible, unblinking, focused on her from somewhere deep within the mist. Her heart tightened. Logic whispered that it was impossible. The fog had no eyes, no awareness. Yet instinct, the raw, primal part of her, screamed that she was being watched. A whisper brushed her ears, so faint she almost didn't catch it. Evelyn. Her blood ran cold. She spun toward the room, half expecting to see someone, anything, but there was nothing. The door remained closed. The walls stood still. The room was empty. Yet the weight of those unseen eyes pressed down on her, relentless, demanding her attention. Evelyn sank back onto the bed, chest heaving, mind spinning. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady the tremor in her body. The fog, the lake, the hands, they were not done. They were waiting, patient and silent, stretching into the night, anticipating her next move. She realized with a sinking heart that her presence in Hollow Creek had been noticed. And that meant the story, the lake, the curse. They were aware of her as if she had been chosen. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. Fear? Yes, but beneath it, a spark of determination. She could not run. She could not hide. She would face it, follow the thread, uncover the truth, even if it meant confronting whatever lurked in the fog outside. She whispered to herself, barely audible over the wind rattling the window panes. I have to know. I have to see. Then a faint, deliberate tap echoed from somewhere beyond the walls, a sound too measured to be the wind. She stiffened, every nerve on edge, eyes wide. The hairs on her arms rose as an icy certainty gripped her. Something was there, just outside, unseen, yet unmistakably present, watching, waiting. And in that moment, as the fog pressed closer and the room seemed to shrink around her, Evelyn understood she was no longer merely an observer. She had stepped into the lake's world, and it had noticed her. Somewhere in the shifting mist, a whisper, soft and deliberate, slid through the night. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady her racing heart. The whisper from the fog lingered in her mind, curling around her thoughts like a living thing. She knew she could not stay confined here, trapped by fear. The lake, the fog, the unseen presence outside. They had already marked her. The answers were out there, and if she wanted to survive, she had to find them. Slowly, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet brushing against the cold floorboards, and made her way to the door. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit and narrow, every creak and groan of the old motel amplifying her unease. She climbed the narrow staircase that led to the attic, each step trembling beneath her weight. Dust rose in tiny clouds with each footfall, catching the weak light from the window at the top of the stairs. Her thoughts swirled, images from the lake and the fog haunting her mind. Was it real? Were the hands, the eyes, the whispers truly reaching for me? She shook her head, trying to silence the doubts, telling herself that her instincts as a journalist would guide her. There was a story here, and it demanded to be uncovered. The attic door loomed ahead, old and weathered, its paint peeling and warped with age. She hesitated for a moment, pressing a hand against the cold wood, listening. Silence. Not even the wind stirred the shadows beyond. Evelyn took a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs with courage and dread all at once, and turned the doorknob. It creaked loudly as the door swung open, revealing a narrow space filled with forgotten memories and layers of dust that danced in the faint shaft of moonlight from a small window. Old trunks, crates, and boxes were stacked haphazardly, cobwebs strung between the beams like delicate ghostly lace. Something caught her eye. A corner of the floorboards had been pried slightly, as if someone had hidden something there long ago. Her curiosity pricked sharply, overriding the cold knot of fear in her stomach. She crouched down, hands brushing against the rough wood, and carefully lifted the loose panel. Beneath it lay a small, leather-bound book, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she pulled it free, blowing off the dust that coated the cover. The leather was worn but solid, and faint initials, M.H., were embossed in gold, glinting faintly in the moonlight. She opened it slowly, the pages brittle beneath her fingertips. Each one was filled with careful, looping handwriting, faded to brown over time. Her eyes widened as she read the first few lines. "The lake remembers what we have done. It calls for those who listen. The fog is alive, and it whispers our sins." A shiver ran down her spine. This was no ordinary diary. The words were soaked in fear, warning, and something darker, something ancient. As she turned the pages, the diary revealed entries from a young girl named Margaret Hale, written almost 100 years ago. Margaret wrote of strange rituals by the lake, of townsfolk gathering in secrecy under the veil of fog, chanting names no one alive dared speak aloud. She described hands rising from the water, pulling at the unworthy, and the way the lake seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Every word confirmed what she had felt the night before. The lake was not innocent, and Hollow Creek was hiding something horrific. A sudden creak from the attic floor made her start, eyes darting around the dim space. The shadows shifted, and the corners of the room seemed to stretch, curling around her like fingers. She forced herself to breathe steadily, but the tension coiled in her chest like a live wire. Every instinct screamed that she was not alone. She felt eyes, unseen, unwavering, watching her from somewhere in the attic, or maybe beyond, from the fog that still clung to the town outside. Evelyn's gaze returned to the diary. Each page pulled her deeper, filling her mind with the dread and the curiosity that had always defined her work. She could feel the story demanding her attention, whispering her name, urging her to continue, even as the shadows seemed to inch closer, drawn by her fascination. One line made her pause, "And those who come seeking the truth will find themselves at the mercy of the lake. It takes only what it has chosen." She shivered, a cold realization creeping into her bones. The lake had noticed her. The fog, the unseen hands, the whispers. They were all waiting for her to go too far. And yet, a part of her, stubborn and unyielding, refused to turn back. She had found the diary. She had found the evidence. The story was real, and she would follow it, no matter where it led. Her hand lingered on the diary's last visible page. The writing stopped mid-sentence, as if the words themselves had been torn away by unseen hands. And then the lake, it opened. The attic seemed to shift around her, the air growing heavier, the silence thickening, almost as if the diary had awakened something long asleep. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Somewhere beyond the small window, the fog swirled, pressing against the glass, dense and alive. She could feel it, not just outside, but inside the room, creeping closer with every heartbeat. A sudden chill raced across her neck, as though icy fingers had brushed her skin. Evelyn's eyes darted toward the shadows at the edges of the attic. She froze, senses straining. The hair on her arms stood on end. Invisible eyes were watching her, unblinking, patient, and far too close for comfort. Her heart thumped like a drum. She realized with a shiver of dread and thrill intertwined, that this was only the beginning. The diary had opened a door. The lake was calling, and whatever was waiting in the fog was no longer content to remain unseen. Evelyn sank back against the attic wall, the diary pressed tightly to her chest, as if holding it could somehow anchor her to reality. Her hands trembled, and yet the pull of the story, the pull of the lake, was irresistible. She could feel it in her bones, the fog pressing against the window, thick and patient, waiting for her next move. The words on the last page still lingered in her mind. And then the lake. It opened. How could a lake open? What could it possibly be, hiding for nearly a century? And why had the girl Margaret written of it in such fear? The sudden creak of the attic stairs below made her flinch. Her heart jumped into her throat. For a moment, she thought the fog had followed her inside, that unseen eyes were now wandering the very walls of the motel. The old floorboards groaned again, slow and deliberate, and she realized she had to move. Clutching the diary, she descended the stairs carefully, each step careful, measured, conscious of the shadows that seemed to stretch just beyond her vision. The lobby was quiet, almost unnervingly so. A single lamp flickered, its weak light casting long, wavering shadows across the cracked walls. Evelyn's eyes fell on the motel owner, an elderly man with thin gray hair and eyes that seemed to measure her presence like a threat. He straightened when he saw her, and for a heartbeat, she imagined he might speak words of welcome. But instead, he merely shook his head, muttering something under his breath that she couldn't catch. Evening, she tried cautiously, voice tight. I found something in the attic. The man's gaze sharpened. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. You don't want to go poking around up there, he said, voice low and strained, almost a growl. People don't go near the lake after sundown, and they sure as hell don't dig into the past. Evelyn frowned, trying to mask the flutter of unease that rose in her chest. The lake? She asked, her voice a whisper of curiosity and fear. I need to understand what happened there. Last night, it wasn't normal. The old man's eyes darkened. Normal. Nothing about that lake is normal. You think it's water and reeds and quiet ripples? It's older than you can imagine. It remembers, and it doesn't forgive. He shook his head slowly, muttering, and the fog. The whispers in the fog. You don't want to hear them. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that he was holding back something vital, something dangerous. She felt it in the cold air pressing around her, in the way the shadows shifted just out of the corner of her eyes. Yet beneath the fear, curiosity ignited like a flame she could not douse. She had come this far. She could not turn away. Not now. Please, she pressed, voice barely more than a thread. I need to know. The innkeeper exhaled slowly, a long rattling sound like the wind through empty trees. Some stories aren't meant to be known, he said. Some truths will follow you home if you try. He stepped back, retreating to his post behind the counter, his eyes never leaving hers. Evelyn noticed that even as he spoke, his fingers twitched toward a small crucifix tucked into his pocket. A warning, or a plea. Evelyn swallowed hard, heart hammering. She left the lobby, the diary clutched to her chest, feeling the weight of every word, every warning. Outside, the fog had deepened, curling around the motel, thickening in swirls like it had a mind of its own. The street was empty, yet she felt the sensation again. Eyes on her. watching, waiting. Not human, not entirely, but undeniable. She walked toward the edge of the motel porch, her boots scraping against the old wood, every sound amplified in the stillness. She paused, hand on the railing, listening. The wind carried a whisper, soft and low, brushing across her ear like fingers through her hair. Evelyn. Her breath caught. The diary pressed against her chest, its pages quivering as if reacting to the whisper. The town around her remained silent, empty. But that silence was heavier than the loudest storm, more suffocating than the fog itself. Every instinct screamed that the lake, the shadows, the whispers, they were all watching, and she was already too close to escape their attention. As she turned back toward her room, she noticed movement in the corner of the fog beyond the streetlights. A figure, tall, dark, indistinct, vanished before she could focus. Her pulse quickened, cold sweat prickling her skin. The fog seemed to shift around her, curling closer, waiting for her to take the next step. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the diary. She could feel it pulsing almost like a heartbeat. A silent summons to go further, to uncover what the town wanted buried. The warnings were real. The shadows were real. And whatever was watching her in the fog was far more patient than any human could ever be. She stepped back inside the motel, heart racing, mind pounding. The innkeeper's words echoed in her head. The lake remembers, and it doesn't forgive. Evelyn realized that curiosity had drawn her into something far older, far darker than she had imagined. And the diary, Margaret Hale's words, was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the walls, the fog shifted again. The eyes were still there, waiting, watching, unseen. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, the diary still clutched tightly to her chest, the leather warm and oddly alive under her fingers. The innkeeper's warning echoed in her mind like a drumbeat she could not shake. The lake remembers, and it doesn't forgive. Every word of caution now felt like a promise, one she hadn't yet begun to understand. The fog outside pressed against the motel windows, thick and heavy, curling and twisting like a living thing. She felt its gaze, patient and deliberate, unblinking, and for the first time, she understood just how deep the danger went. Her eyes darted to the hallway outside, dim and shadowed. The floorboards creaked faintly, though she had been alone for hours. A cold shiver ran down her spine, and she realized the sensation she had felt earlier, the subtle pressure of invisible eyes, had not left. The air itself seemed to move differently, charged with something unseen. Evelyn's pulse raced. She was not imagining it. Something was watching her, waiting for her next move, patient and calculated. A sudden whisper brushed her ear, soft and teasing, barely more than a breath. "Evelyn." She froze, heart hammering in her chest. The voice was distant yet intimate, threaded with an authority that rooted her to the spot. Slowly, she rose, gripping the diary tighter, and stepped toward the door. The hallway stretched out before her, dim and unfamiliar, shadows pooling in the corners as though alive. She had no choice but to move, curiosity and dread intertwined in equal measure. Her bare feet brushed the floorboards, every creak magnified in the oppressive silence. The shadows seemed to sway at the edges of her vision, stretching unnaturally, almost as if they were leaning toward her. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had come here to uncover the story, and the story was demanding that she go further into places the town and its inhabitants had long since forsaken. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A shadow in the corner of the hallway, longer and darker than any natural form should have been. She blinked, heart skipping a beat. It vanished the moment she focused on it. Evelyn's breath quickened. The diary pulsed faintly in her hands, as if sensing the presence lurking just beyond her perception. She could feel her skin prickle, a low hum of awareness crawling up her spine. She stepped closer to the window, desperate for light, for something familiar, anything that would anchor her mind. The fog outside was thick, almost opaque, curling around the edges of the town, pressing against the motel like it had weight. And then she saw it, a flicker in the mist. A figure, tall and indistinct, moving slowly, deliberate in its approach. Her stomach twisted. It didn't move like a human. Its presence was fluid, drifting with the fog, blending and emerging in ways that defied reason. Evelyn's thoughts raced. I have to know. I have to see. Yet the rational part of her mind screamed warnings she could not ignore. The diary, Margaret Hale's frantic words, the innkeeper's warning, all converged into one undeniable truth. Whatever was out there, it was connected to the lake. It had been waiting, and now it had noticed her. Her fingers tightened around the diary. The edges of the pages scratched against her palms, and she felt an almost magnetic pull, urging her to read further, to uncover what had been hidden for nearly a century. Each word she read in her mind summoned more unease. The rituals, the sacrifices, the fog that breathed. It all seemed to pulse with life, a rhythm synchronized with the lake itself. A soft creak behind her made her spin around. The hallway was empty, yet the feeling remained. Eyes upon her, unblinking, patient, calculating. A chill crept down her spine as she realized the shadow she had seen was closer now, no longer just in the fog outside. It lingered in the edges of the room, at the periphery of her vision. A presence she could feel but not fully see. Her heart raced, her thoughts tumbling over each other. I came here to uncover the truth. I can't stop now. I won't. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity, stubbornness, and the pull of the story anchored her in place. She whispered to herself, words trembling but resolute. I need to know what's really happening here. I need to see it. The fog outside shifted violently as though reacting to her declaration. A sudden, icy wind swept through the open window, carrying a whisper that was barely audible, threading through the air like a needle. Closer! Evelyn's breath caught. The diary's pages quivered, and the shadows at the edges of the room stretched as if they were moving toward her. She felt the presence solidify, no longer a flicker in the mist, but something tangible, patient and unseen, watching her, waiting for her to take the next step. The attic stairs groaned faintly from above, or perhaps from within the walls themselves. She could not tell. Every hair on her arms stood on end. She knew, with an icy certainty, that the diary had done more than reveal the past. It had awakened something that had been lying in wait. Evelyn backed toward the bed, clutching the diary to her chest. Her eyes darted around the dim room. Every shadow seemed alive. Every corner seemed to breathe. The fog outside writhed, restless, almost sentient. And through it all, she felt the unseen eyes, unblinking, patient, calculating, and waiting. Evelyn's hands shook as she held the diary tighter, pages fluttering as if stirred by an unseen breeze. The shadows around the room had thickened, curling and stretching in the corners, but she refused to tear her eyes away from the delicate, fading script. Every word Margaret Hale had written felt alive, a thread reaching across decades, tying her to something far older and darker than she had imagined. The fog outside swirled against the window pane, pressing and twisting, carrying a cold, wet scent that filled the room with a damp, earthy weight. It whispered against the glass in a way that made her pulse quicken. It's still out there, watching. Evelyn's mind refused to rest, replaying the events of the lake. The hands clawing, the voices calling, the fog swallowing everything. And yet, she knew instinctively that the diary held the key to understanding it all. She turned another page, careful not to tear the brittle paper. Margaret's words were frantic now, messy and uneven. The lake. It remembers everything. The fog. The whispers. The hands. They take what we owe. They have been waiting, watching for generations. And those who come seeking. Evelyn's eyes widened as she continued, each sentence dragging her deeper into dread. Seeking the truth will find themselves at the mercy of the lake. There is a power here, older than any memory. It hungers for... She paused, breath hitching. The diary trembled slightly in her hands, and a cold shiver ran down her spine, as if the words themselves were alive. The room felt smaller now. Shadows pressed closer, stretching toward her, drawn by some magnetic pull she could neither name nor resist. Evelyn's thoughts raced. Why does this feel like it's happening now? Why am I feeling it? The fog outside thickened, darkening the already dim room. She realized with a shiver that whatever Margaret had written, whatever had cursed Hollow Creek and the lake, it had never truly left. It had been lying in wait, patient, unseen, watching, waiting for someone to awaken it. Her breath caught. A sudden creak from the attic stairs made her stiffen, and her eyes darted toward the corner of the room. The shadows moved again, shifting unnaturally, reaching, stretching, as though trying to close in on her. The diary pulsed faintly in her hands, and a whisper, faint but clear, slithered across the edges of her mind. Closer. Evelyn swallowed hard, pressing the book to her chest. She forced herself to breathe steadily, though her heart was hammering so hard it echoed in her ears. She had to know. She had to see the truth. She couldn't turn back now. The diary had opened a door, and whatever waited on the other side was aware she had crossed its threshold. She turned the next page slowly, fingers trembling. The handwriting became more erratic, almost scrawled, as if Margaret had been writing in fear of being discovered. The chosen ones will be taken by the water. The fog will guide them, the hands will rise, and then the lake. Evelyn's fingers froze. She held her breath, her heart lurching, sensing that the diary had paused mid-sentence deliberately. The words hung in the air like a threat, unfinished and unbearable, demanding completion she could not yet see. A gust of wind rattled the window, carrying the chill of the fog inside. Evelyn flinched as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lean closer, thickening like smoke. She could feel their presence, patient, watching, waiting for her to react. Her mind screamed that she should run, that she should leave Hollow Creek immediately, but her journalistic instinct, her stubborn determination, held her rooted in place. The story demanded answers, and she would not abandon it. Her eyes scanned the attic, the floorboards, the corners, seeking the unseen, trying to discern movement. The room was still, Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, suffocating, patient, relentless. She realized the diary was not just a record of the past. It was a warning. It was alive, connected to the lake, to the fog, to whatever presence lurked just beyond sight. And it wanted her to understand, but not without fear. Evelyn's pulse raced as she whispered to herself, voice trembling yet resolute. I need to see it. I have to know. Her words barely left her lips when a shadow shifted in the corner of her vision, moving in a way that no human could. Her chest tightened, cold dread flooding her body. Yet the pull of the diary, the story, the lake, held her firm. She turned back to the last visible page of the diary. The words trailed off, mid-sentence, leaving a void she could not fill. And then the lake. It opened. Evelyn's eyes widened as the fog outside seemed to pulse, in rhythm with the unfinished phrase. The air grew colder. The shadows thickened. And somewhere in that dense, living fog, she could sense it. The invisible eyes, patient, unblinking, watching, waiting. Evelyn pressed the diary to her chest, heart hammering in terror and determination. She understood the truth with bone-deep certainty. The lake was alive. The curse was alive. And whatever was watching her now would not let her go until it had completed its design.